What up, y'all? Welcome back to week 6 waiver wire show. What a week we just saw in the NFL this week. It was quite crazy. We saw a game like the Arizona Cardinals versus the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee Titans ended up getting their first win to just a mess of mistakes from the Arizona Cardinals, including one of the waiver wire pickup popular guys was DeMarco, who, afraid to say, he is not going to have probably an opportunity moving forward. It looks like this is Michael Carter's role, and we'll talk about him shortly. But let's get right into this. I want to talk about a guy I think you should be stashing for week 6 waiver wire, and his name is Loveland. Let's talk about Loveland here, who happens to not have the numbers you would like to see, right? We're seeing it here, 3 fantasy points, 4 fantasy points. He got hurt in that Dallas game, wasn't able to come back, and ended up wasn't able to play for the Las Vegas game, ended up being a bye week, should be healthy enough to play week 6 Monday Night Football versus the Commanders. I want to mention him. Loveland was a 10th overall pick for the Chicago Bears. Ben Johnson handpicked him. He had a chance to pick up a guy like Tyler Warren, who right now is doing amazing, and he picked Loveland. Now, if you watch these guys in college, you saw him, product of Michigan, University of Michigan, and Tyler Warren was a product of the University of Penn State. You saw a lot of what Tyler Warren was able to do in college. Seemed like the final year too, seemed like there was a little bit of more of those fabricated touches. That doesn't stop him from being really good, obviously. But one of his biggest issues I felt in college was truly separating. He was schemed up a ton. And now I bring that up just to show maybe the reason why Loveland was not only on the Bears wish list. We saw teams like the Denver Broncos and other teams that were highly interested in moving up for a player like Loveland's talent. Loveland, 27% roster in Yahoo leagues. I have him on my team. I wouldn't be suggesting anything that I am not doing. I have Loveland stashed away in some leagues. I expect them to come out of the bye really strong. I think Ben Johnson has prepped up a perfect game plan for this guy here. Tight end wise, Kokomet has not been cutting it for them. Kokomet is a strong blocker along the line. I probably wouldn't even call him a strong blocker, but he's a pretty solid blocking tight end. He'll have some opportunities catching, but I think Loveland's the guy you're going to see schemed up a little bit more, not just as a tight end, but a wide receiver. And again, one of the reasons why I think they picked him over Tyler Warren is the ability to separate. That's not something you have to always scheme. Some offensive coordinators have to do it, but Loveland might be able to beat a lot of his one-on-one matchups, just like he did in college. Loveland is the guy you guys should be targeting this upcoming week. I would sit him, bench him. If hopefully you don't have a need to start him right away, I think he's a guy you should consider. Put him in your bench, put some fab on it. I think he's going to start shining. He was one of the popular plays or popular tight ends that folks were grabbing this past offseason during best ball season. I think he's someone you definitely want to keep your eye out for. Let's get to the next guy here. I want to get through this quickly. We just talked about tight ends. And real quick, actually, let me give some flowers to Tyler Warren, because I don't want this to make it sound like I'm hating Tyler Warren whatsoever. Tyler Warren is an excellent player, and I think he's looked phenomenal for the Indianapolis Colts. Tyler Warren right now leads all tight ends in receiving yards, and that is at 307. Dalton Kincaid has 287 yards. Trey McBride, 275 yards. This is quite amazing. If you're watching these games, you're also noticing how great he's doing as well in that offense. He's the focal point of the offense right now. He is the number one option in this Indianapolis Colts offense, and we just saw them have a really strong week once again. Indianapolis Colts is looking good. I know they've had maybe not the strongest matchups week in and week out, but when you're really watching this offense, and credit to their defense as well, who has played well, they're looking good. they're starting to shine. Daniel Jones is looking good as well. But Tyler Warren, if you have him, congratulations. What an amazing pickup. We're starting to notice right away how big of a deal it is to not pay up for a tight end during drafts. Maybe that all changes for folks come next week. All right, y'all, let's get started here. I want to talk about some other tight ends here. In the next guy, if you saw the thumbnail, yep, his name is it's Mason Taylor, product of LSU, plays for the New York Jets. I mentioned in the last show, this is someone you want to keep an eye out for. Mason Taylor is now even more of a priority after we saw the amazing week he had. Week 4, he had 7 targets, 5 receptions, 65 yards, which is why I put him in your radar last week. Told you to pick him up, especially if you needed a tight end. Well, week 5 just came by. They played the Dallas Cowboys, dropped 17 fantasy points, 12 targets, 9 receptions, 67 yards. I think he might be the most popular player this week. As far as waiver wire goes, this is like a tight end rookie week, in my opinion, at least from what I'm suggesting. But this is one of the tight ends that I think, and one of the players that's going to be sought out after big time. All right, let's talk about another one. I'm starting off the show, y'all, with a tight end position, which isn't very common at all, especially because the tight end position is a bit different to kind of chase and go after. Let's talk about A.J. Barner. A.J. Barner is someone I find interesting here because A.J. Barner is more of a blocking tight end and has been as far as like since he's come into the league. But one of the things about A.J. Barner is that he's starting to show how good he can also be as a receiving tight end. And he's showing you those numbers, and most of all, efficient numbers, because he's catching those tight ends. So if you're in a half PPR league, I think he's a priority this week, in my personal opinion. Tight end premium leagues, all those, like you want to put him in your bench. You may not have to start him once again. And I'll go through some of the tight ends that are probably off this week in their bye weeks shortly. But I think A.J. Barner is someone you should be considering. A.J. Barner, if you're watching the tape, you're seeing how they're scheming him up really well too, as far as, getting him more involved on offense. That's huge. Especially, this is something you're going to want when you need to fill in that tight end position, especially with the guys up top, injuries to Brock Bowers, and just not getting enough from the tight ends you paid up high in your drafts. All right, A.J. Barner was the name I wanted to mention. We've already mentioned Colston Loveland, Mason Taylor, A.J. Barner. Let's talk about Theo Johnson. Theo Johnson just caught two touchdowns, caught another one alongside. It looks like Jackson Dart is starting to target this man. This is a Thursday game versus the Philadelphia Eagles this week. So if you're in a quick need for a tight end, to replace quite possibly here. Let me see. I got bye week 6. We got the Houston Texans on a bye week. So, that's if you're starting Dalton Schultz. We got the Minnesota Vikings on a bye week. TJ Hawkinson. I want to tap in on that real quick because I want to give some more information on that. And then who am I missing here? I know that those are 2 of the teams right now from what I'm seeing, and might be just the only 2 teams. Yes, it looks like it. Yep, those are the teams that are off this week. But TJ Hawkinson has also been a guy who I feel like is not really involved quite literally in this offense. Even when you look at his numbers, he's just been someone they've been utilizing, when first, second read are out. We're seeing how great, obviously Justin Jefferson is, but then Jordan Addison coming back was massive for this team. But it's just Hawkinson has not been doing it for me. I don't think he's necessarily a drop, but you're probably not starting him right now unless you have a better option, right? If he is your best option, then so be it. But I think you should be grabbing one of these tight ends that I mentioned, especially during this bye week. Give a little, tryout base for your team since he's on a bye week. But yes, Theo Johnson looks to have a rapport right now with Jackson Dart. That's really encouraging to see. He was a name, someone that we were talking about. And speaking of Penn State, he was also there with Tyler Warren. Theo Johnson has a pretty solid role and isn't competing with much currently right now with the New York Giants. He's another guy I think you should be tapping in. All right, let's get to quarterback. I don't think there's much options out there, I'll be honest. There might be some guys that you're going to need to fill in, but it doesn't seem like there's as many teams as last week that we saw that are currently on a bye week. So we're going to look at a guy like Sam Darnold. So if you have, I guess, Carson Wentz or a CJ Stroud, or just need someone because some matchups seem a little bit tough to play out, I think we should start looking at Sam Darnold, y'all. I thought that one of the things that was very encouraging to see was Darnold was able to pass the football a lot more this week. If you look at the numbers he's had since week 2, 19 fantasy points, 20 fantasy points, 18 fantasy points. And look at this bad boy here versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 35 fantasy points. If you watched him last year with KOC, Kevin O'Connell, you saw how well he played under that offense. He's off to a solid start. 9 passing touchdowns. Yes, he got 4 of them this past week. I think that continues when you look at their current OC previously with the New Orleans Saints. He really came in there to kind of shed a little bit of the same offensive schemes that they were running. That was very similar to what Kevin O'Connell was running out in Minnesota. Kyle Shanahan was running with the Niners. So I think it was really interesting to bring that kind of offensive scheme already into the picture. And I think that that correlates really well now when we look at a possible QB target in Sam Darnold. All right, y'all, let's go right into it. Running back, I'll be honest, there are some options out there, not as strong as we've had in previous week, but I do want to talk about Kendre Miller. We touched on it a little bit last week, and yes, he didn't score as much, but what we want to look for is opportunities. What we want to look for is volume, and we're hearing the reports, right, that Alvin Kamara, there's a good chance he might be traded right before the trade deadline for many teams right now who are in dire need of a running back. Kendre Miller may take on that starting role, doesn't have much competition behind him as well. And if something were to happen to Alvin Kamara, Kendre Miller seems to have a very healthy, solid workload moving forward. I think Kendre Miller should be at the top of your list, because it's really encouraging to see. And I've mentioned this before, TCU product, he can also catch out of the backfield, which we're not seeing as much from Alvin Kamara like we used to in the past, but there's a good chance that if he were to get that RB1 role in New Orleans, he might start looking a little bit up with this. So it's still encouraging to see with a backup role that he has some targets going his way. Michael Carter, some grabbed him. I know in this league that I'm in, he is gone. Michael Carter was the guy that some people were rostering over DeMarcado, but once DeMarcado went off the waiver wire, I know a lot of people, once they got news that Michael Carter was going to possibly start, and he kind of broke that news, right? That's when people were jumping in on that. He had 18 fantasy points, 18 attempts, 51 rushing yards, 1 touchdown. This was also very encouraging to see. If you watched last week waiver wire show, I mentioned he was doing things like this even with the Jets. And he had numbers like this as far as a pass catching back. Played at UNC with Drake May, who's doing a phenomenal job right now in the NFL. He was with Javonte Williams in that backfield. Drake May used to love peppering guys like this. But the only reason why I'm mentioning it, yes, someone has him in the league that I'm currently in, but he's still only 40% rostered. So if you're happen to be in that league where he's still available, please, you're going to want to prioritize him this week, even though things may seem a little bit murky. He's the guy right now until Trey Benson is back, and his injury doesn't sound the best, but you want to get the guys with those workload. I'll even throw out there Rico Dowdle. Rico Dowdle is probably not even out there. Obviously, Rico Dowdle news came with Chuba Hubbard's news came down. People were quick to jump on Rico Dowdle. Rico Dowdle is only 59% rostered currently in Yahoo leagues. This is a guy, if he's out there, I know there's like a league or two I may have seen him in. maybe one. But either way, Rico Dotto's out there. This is the guy you want to pay a good amount of fab for. The reason why I say that is, yes, he may have only one more game to come back to and probably play. I think he's playing, yes, the Dallas Cowboys, which is a revenge game narrative if you're into those such things. But Rico Dotto looked amazing. 23 attempts, 206 rushing yards, 4 targets, 3 receiving, three catches, 28 yards. But what's encouraging was that this Carolina Panthers is really banged up right now along the offensive line. So it's really good to see players like this pop, which means there's a big possible chance that he's got a better role carved out for him, even when Chuba Hubbard comes back. If you have Hubbard and he happens to be out there, I would be trying to snatch him. If not, maybe possibly trade for someone because you already know who the handcuff is for that squad. And if not, like I said, if he's carved out a bigger role, that might hurt some Chuba Hubbard owners. All right, I want to talk about 2 guys here at the running back position that most are going to have some questions about. Their names are Hassan Haskins and Kimani Vidal. I'm going to put up Vidal's stats and stuff up on my page right now. And the reason why is because Hassan Haskins, he was the thing with Hassan Haskins is he played at Michigan. So he's played under Jim Harbaugh. I think right away it's easy to consider him as the guy who has first dibs at that position. But I think Kimani Vidal is the guy you really want. Now, I don't think it's a bad thing to still put Haskins and stash him if you're in desperate need for running backs. And with all the injury bugs that we're getting, especially at that position, it doesn't hurt. Depth is good. We just saw it with DeMarcado and Michael Carter. Folks were all over DeMarcado, even though I mentioned my cautious approach last week during my waiver wire week show, week 5. I was able to talk about those things. This is back to back again. We got Hassan Haskins, who has clear opportunity just because of the connections he has with Jim Harbaugh. And then we got Kimani Vidal, who in my opinion is more talented. Coming out of college, Troy, he had a very heavy volume. I know it's not, one of the better D1 schools we're talking about, but it's always encouraging to see players that come into the NFL. You kind of want to see the type of volume they had in college to just give you slightly an idea what kind of workload we could expect in the NFL. Obviously, we're doing a lot of the predictions here, but once Omarion Hampton went down, and I do got to mention that, sucks for those who are owners of his. I have him in some of my leagues. He's currently on the IR for at least 4 games minimum. So 4 games is still big enough to hold us down. What is that? They got a bye week in 12, and who knows how long they might keep him out if this injury lasts a little bit longer. If this is bye week 6, right, we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 10. And then maybe if he's not fully healthy, they're not rushing him against Jacksonville and then the bye week. So I want you to consider these things because they're not the biggest priorities, but they actually sneaky might be important in the long run, because if he's expected back and his practice window is open, and I'm talking about Omarion Hampton, there's no chance we know how healthy he'll be. And he might just not come back to week 13, which by then we're inching closer to the fantasy playoffs. So just something to keep an eye out. I do know the Los Angeles Chargers offensive line is not the best, but let me get back to this. Omarion Hampton, after he went down, Hassan Haskins came out there, 3 carries for 5 yards, 1 reception for 2 yards. Kimani Vidal, 3 carries for 16 yards, 1 reception for 1 yard. A lot of what Haskins did, he was kind of the first man up for that role, and Kimani Vidal was basically there for the full 4th quarter when they already brought in Trey Lance, and they kind of threw in that flag. I think Kimani Vidal has the juice, ran a 4.4 in the draft. I just think that ultimately this might be the guy with the biggest upside. If you were into best ball last year, he was a lot of the folks in the later rounds, kind of popular player, deep sleeper guy that most were drafting. I had a big amount of exposure to him as well. So from my perspective and my choice, I want Kimani Vidal over Hassan Haskins. If I'm wrong, we'll come back next week and I'll go ahead and mention that and just take ownership for giving you the wrong input there. But hopefully we're right. And that's why we're doing this. We are trying to make good predictions moving forward. All right, wide receiver. Didn't think we were going to make this one of the later choices here. There's not a lot of options. And obviously, depending on your league, I do want to mention Josh Downs, and we'll go through this one a little bit quicker just because, and it's unfortunate because usually in teams, for fantasy leagues, right? I know one of my leagues, I'm in desperate need of wide receivers, and it's just hard. It's hard to find a consistent wide receiver that you can start on a week-to-week basis. But Josh Downs was always a popular guy. Even last year played really well. This year, his role was very diminished as far as who he was in this offense. And a lot of that helps when Tyler Warren is the number one option in that offense as far as the coats go. But for fantasy purposes, it really hurt guys like Josh Downs. Michael Pittman is on the outside. Josh Downs was playing a lot in the slot. They're trying to move him around and get him better opportunities, right? So that he can do better. And right now we see him 11 fantasy points week 5, 8 targets, 6 receptions for 54 yards. If he's out there, I still think he's a solid bench depth player. And if you're in a 3 wide receiver league and need something, Josh Downs may be the guy. Kendrick Bourne was picked up on a lot of teams. I want to mention him. If indeed Ricky Pearsall and we get Juwan Jennings and all these guys out once again, Kendrick Bourne might be at the top of your list in terms of opportunities. We saw him catch 10 catches over 140 yards, which was very impressive. But has a previous report with Mac Jones. We've talked about that on our shows. That plays a huge part. I don't know if I want to prioritize him if he's out there during this waiver wire action, but maybe when waiver wire passes and he's out there for free, pick him up if you have space and stash him, especially once we get the news. But I think a lot of it had to do because it was a shorter week last week when they played on Thursday night versus the Rams. So something to just, keep an eye out for and process. Isaiah Bond is a guy I want to talk about here. Isaiah Bond, back-to-back weeks, 6 targets, 7 targets. Now, the numbers don't look sharp, but when you're getting opportunities like this with Dylan Gabriel actually did not look awful this week. And obviously, this offense is going to lean heavily. Kevin Stefanski's offense leans heavily on the run. Quinshon Judkins has looked amazing and so far has looked great, yes. I think that Isaiah Bond is someone you want to keep an eye out for with Cedric Tillman out. Jerry Jeudy is playing a lot on the outside. I think Isaiah Bond, they get a little more creative with and give him options out there to be able to give you something. So again, these are deeper league stuff, but if you need wide receivers, just due to the current circumstances of how these injury bugs have come down, he's a guy you want to talk about. One more name, I'm going to mention him, Romeo Doubs. He was out there previously for last week, but there was a bye week last week. So what happens is that a lot of folks get to this point where they drop guys. And here, obviously, he's picked up in this league, but still only 51% roster, 3 touchdowns. Now, is he a viable option because of consistency? No, that's not him. Clearly, you see it. Week 1, 8 fantasy points is not the worst thing in the world, but look at week 3, 4. But week 2, he had 11. And a lot of that has to do because of the touchdown, right? The touchdown is the one that kind of pushes these numbers up. That's basically why we're playing Romeo Doubs. Romeo Doubs just gives us these kind of spike weeks. Do we expect a game like this again? Maybe not. 3 touchdowns is a lot to ask for. But currently, right now, as we're seeing with the Green Bay Packers, Romeo Doubs is their wide receiver 1. If he happens to be out there, and he could be out there, and Yahoo's telling you only 51% rostered, Romeo Doubs is out there. I think he's a good option for those teams that are in desperate need of a wide receiver. Let's go right into the defensive talk. I want to get to this real quickly here because I think that this is still a very important thing to talk about. I know some folks are in leagues because of the bye weeks, and in this league, he is not. Green Bay Packers are a defense that should be out there in most leagues only because, and I'm not finding them here, but we don't need to pull all that stuff up as we're doing this. I apologize, guys. Well, waiver wire, right? So we got the bye week. We have the Green Bay Packers. They have a really good opponent this week. I think Green Bay Packers is someone you should highly consider. And as we scroll down here, there's some other options, right? But truly, defense, we're streaming at this point, y'all. That's where it's come down to. It's hard to play even a Dallas defense, even though they're playing Carolina. Not something you want to consider. I know some people may look into the New Orleans option here, right? Because they play New England, but I think Drake May has played well. You could play the Chargers defense, who's playing Miami. Tennessee's defense may be someone you might consider. I wouldn't trust the Vegas defense as much, who we're seeing here has a higher fantasy points projected. I'm not into that defense. That defense is giving up a lot. Tennessee kind of looked better in the second half of that game when they were getting back. But Tennessee's defense, even though they're not projecting well, I don't really go too far based on their projections, right? I think Tennessee defense is a team you would consider. They scored 15 fantasy points this past week. I think that if there's anyone you want to prioritize this week, it's definitely going to be them. That's about it, y'all. I just wanted to share some thoughts here. It's a funny week just because it's not the greatest week for waiver wire, but I think that there are some options still out there for you guys to tackle. Make sure to follow my page here on YouTube. Please subscribe. Please like the video, share it with others. Trying to build a community here, like I've mentioned many times. I am going to be live once again this Sunday, 10:35 a.m. Central, 11:35 a.m. Eastern. If you're available, please hop on the show. Ask your questions. I am more than happy to answer. We're doing some DFS talks, which has been fun as well. So make sure to hop on. And if you can go look down below, down the ticker, I have my Instagram account and TikTok account. I plan to put more out there as the week continues. Good luck this week in your waiver wires and in your matchups. May you make the best decisions for your lineups so you can capture that dub. Good luck. Thank you guys once again. Peace.